Carmel. Nice to see you all again. So this evening, as you might know, we yeah. This is Vita, and she's actually connecting with our online listeners right now. So she's broadcasting, which is really wonderful. So that's my echo, I guess, right now.
I'll be quiet in just a minute.
Yeah,
I just want to introduce the evening to our listeners.
I don't think so.
So we're here at Care for Creation, our fourth gathering, and Carmel is just introducing the evening. We've got a gathering here of about, I don't know, about 20, 25 people. We're all ready to go, and the theme tonight is From Extraction to a Gift Economy.
You got it.
And I'll hand it over to you now.
Cool. Thanks, Vita. So yeah, that's neat. We have a group in Oliver that's listening right now, as well as a whole many different people from sort of all across Western Canada area is where this radio station is. So
Can we say hi to them?
yeah, what Rihanna does every time is say, let's say hi. So on the count of three, what are we gonna say?
Hi.
Hello, friends. Hello, friends. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Hello, friends.
Wonderful. So, the theme for our evening is From Extractivism to a Gift Economy. So we will get to that in a little bit, but I thought I'd give you an outline of what we're going to do tonight, so you're not wondering what's coming next. We have with us two dynamic and local speakers with us tonight who are going to help us explore this theme, and so that's Christine and that's Ross. So thanks so much for coming, and I'm actually going to do a bit of an introduction for us on this theme, so that I had a really good piece of feedback from somebody from last time, which was there was so much there from our speaker last time, but I didn't have an introduction, so I couldn't really engage. So I wanted to make sure that I helped set the stage for this topic. So I'll do a little bit of that. We'll hear from our two speakers, and then the last sort of part of our evening. This is what I'd like to do. So let me know what you think of this. But I'd like for us to start thinking about what happens next with this series or this effort, because like as Rhiannon reminded me, it's not a question of do we want something to come of this, because we're all gathered here, so obviously it's meaningful to us, but rather the question is what do we want to see come of it. So I think it'd be really fun, especially with Ross and with Christine being with us, to start thinking about, well, what is needed for our communities. What do we want to see happen? Because we could create it to be absolutely anything. So we'll spend some time this evening exploring that as well. So to begin, let's acknowledge that Spirit of Life Lutheran Church is located on unceded Coast Salish territory, and that we're guests. And so for this we give many layers of thanks. And we'll also recognize the settler and immigrant people who passed through this land in search of better homes for their families. And as well, I'd like to acknowledge Pastor Cliff and the Spirit of Life congregation who have opened their church building for us. So we really appreciate that. And I've neglected to say thank you our previous times of meeting. So my apologies. Thanks for
No apologies. You're most welcome. We're glad to be hosting this series.
Thank you. So now for the last 2 weeks, for those of you that are new, we were exploring the theme, which was decolonization and Indigenous story, and we began to see with the guidance of Sarah how the process of decolonization is a process of all re-belonging to place. And she used the term, or the phrase, it's a theology of place. And what I think is interesting, what's interesting for myself is that with each theme that we have, that we're moving through, we're discovering how our external ecological crises are at the very root caused by this disconnection we have with our place, or that we don't feel like we belong to our land, water, and communities. And so last theme, I think, was once again a reminder of that, that the process of decolonization is a process for all of us to get to know our particular water and landscapes. So this evening, the question is, okay, well, what mindset has given rise to this disconnection that we now have? And this mindset is referred to by many now as extractivism. So, what is extraction to you? We've got some images up here. I see, I don't want to explain it because I didn't draw it, but it seems like explosions of some kind over here, and we have my attempt at a fracking. But yes, thanks to Allison for the additions here. And over here, this I really like this one. It's a giant sword through the earth, and down here is a flower that's wilting. We have choked rivers, lakes, and streams, and then the word beauty here is crossed out. And this one is loss, emptiness, violation. And so, what about for others? What is extraction to you? What does it mean? What does it feel like? What does it look like?
My first association with the word extraction is a dentist extracting a tooth. Right, so if I'd been any good at all at drawing, I would have tried to draw a dentist with his foot planted on a person's forehead, his other foot on their stomach, using all the leverage you can get to rip a tooth out of their mouth.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Thank you for sharing. I'm very conscious of my teeth now. Yeah.
But that point is pretty symbolic about tearing out parts of a body. You know, there are some parts that need to be taken out for our health, for example, like bad teeth or cancer and that sort of stuff. But some stuff, like what we take, indiscriminately rip stuff out of our planet. You know, that's kind of like ripping out our bones or your blood and that sort of thing. So it's,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. There's something very violent about it. I sense from
Yeah.
Well, it's not extraction per se, because everything lives at the expense of something else. It's the question of a degree of extraction.
the degree of extraction. Interesting. Yes. Yeah.
When I think of extraction, I think of like pillaging the land and just like sucking it dry the way
Yeah.
you would suck up all the liquid in a bottle or something until it was completely empty, like sucking it through a straw.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I went to was like, well, what do you do when it's been sucked dry, there's no more oil, there's no more minerals, then what? What do you do? And I just think that's probably why we're here.
Interesting. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
But the thing that we all have to remember, if we look out that window, the things that you see, the only things you see that are above the ground that previously weren't below the ground are the trees and the mountains. You show me something that hasn't been extracted that you look at out there.
That's a really good point.
And so we live with that, and unless we're going to do something,
Totally. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. That's a really important reminder. Absolutely. Yeah. We'll try to get there for sure. When I've asked this question before, it's been interesting because it's often acts of extraction, and so often what I might see up here would be a picture of the oil sands and maybe of mining and hydraulic fracking, and so the word extraction, I think we often think of the acts of it, but like everything, any act begins with a mindset. And so that's what I kind of want to explore a little bit right now. And I think one way to conceptualize this mindset is to say that extractivism makes what was once known as a relative a resource. And let's hear the words of Leanne. Did you have that? Of Leanne Betasamasaki?
No, I do.
Catherine, can you read those for us?
The act of extraction removes all the relationships that give whatever is being extracted meaning. My land is seen as a resource. My relatives in the plant and animal worlds are seen as resources. My culture and knowledge are seen as resources. My body and my children are seen as resources because they are the potential to uphold and grow the extraction assimilation system. From the
Yeah.
Alderville First Nation.
Many people, and I know Leanne has expressed this to us, is that to her, extractivism is this antithesis to Indigenous culture. So, and it's the mindset that gave rise to colonialism and maintains it today. And so it would say that instead of a mindset that is based on relating to each other and belonging to each other, relatives, it's a mindset that is based on separating and depends on increasing separation to maintain itself. So, which leads us, of course, to the question of why? Why do we have this mindset, if that is what we have? And so, for me, the reason we extract is because we assume, there's an assumption that every living and non-living thing has a measurable value. It assumes that all of some things or someone's value can be and should be measured. And what's interesting is that if you sort of look back at this history of where this mindset originates, there's a lot of examples of how the monetary system that we have came out of some really, for many, good intentions of wanting to place value on things so that we could measure it and make sure that it was equally given. So that's interesting that it often has come from a good intention, but it's led to, as we can see, as we all know, catastrophic consequences. And that's, to me, because in order to measure something in this way, you have to remove it. It needs to stand alone. It needs to be a standalone unit. And that means that the relationships of that thing or that creature or that story no longer matter. They can't be measured. And so, as Leanne would say, extractivism is inherently blind to the relationships of whatever is being extracted. And so I find it very, very interesting because it's this mindset that has given risen to crises that are environmental, social, cultural, political, and ecological. And so environmentally, it's given rise to massive open pit mines, or politically, it's given rise to the ability for massive policies to move right through. Socially and culturally, it's given rise to hyper-individualism, or economically, it's given rise to a monetary system that depends on increasingly separating relatives. And ecologically, it's given rise to an absence of a common story. So I find it really interesting that we can kind of find a real root here through extractivism. Now, as we all know, and I know we've expressed in this room before, the suffering that is happening this instant around the world and around the corner from this mindset is absolutely cause for outrage and for sorrow. And I wanted to give you one example for myself of a time when I was completely outraged about this kind of scope of these of policies that, for example, can move right through because of this mindset. So one example would be that, as some of you know, I spent last year living in Peru on behalf of a couple different organizations And for this example, it was had to do with working with Mining Watch Canada. It was May 14th, and I believe what was going on here in Canada at the time was the Duffy scandal. The Duffy scandal. And so I don't know how much media coverage was on the fact that actually, right during that time, Mr. Harper visited President Ollanta in Lima to discuss Canadian mining in Peru. Now, what was interesting is that the conversation, of course, was not in regards to the tremendous human and environmental rights abuses of Canadian mining companies in Peru, but rather, on May 14th, Mr. Harper announced the allotment of $53 million of previous aid money, which would have been under the jurisdiction of CETA. So $53 million of taxpayer money to Canadian mining companies in Peru who had a corporate social responsibility agenda. This caused me so much rage because I knew I had seen, I'm lucky not to experience, but I knew the suffering that that kind of money in those hands would cause, because that industry there, our Canadian companies there are particularly famous for some of the cruelest practices, and particularly within Indigenous rural communities in Peru. So that's my example of just being completely outraged and paralyzed and just sitting in despair. And my temptation, and I think that we can all kind of relate to this, is that when we glimpse this massive suffering or we experience it, the temptation is to shame and blame and oppose or even hate those particular persons or corporations that have that kind of power that overnight can make policy decisions that affect millions of people or condemn species to extinction. So I think that's our temptation, and I think we also see a lot of that kind of language even within our environmental or social justice groups, is that that kind of language of opposition. But, and alas, the world is not made of just purely good people and purely bad people. And as we know, it's not just a matter of electing in just the good people. Because I think what's so powerful about this mindset is that we are all caught in it. We're all touched by it. We all suffer from extraction, but we also all lend to it. And I think the 18-year-old boy from Nova Scotia who builds the rig in northern BC, he's not the sole cause of the suffering that that rig will cause that community and that land. And Mr. Harper is not the sole cause of the suffering that my friends in Peru will endure from that kind of money being in the hands of those kinds of companies. And likewise, what I find interesting is that the long-term anti-pipeline activist who drives a car on occasion, her voice is not false because she's not 110% off-grid like her message. So we're all caught in this mindset. The structure of it is that it's inherently relative versus relative. So I think this is when I flip for dramatic effect. So, the bad news is that,
That was the good.
yeah, hold on. The bad news is that because it's a mindset, it's not as simple as, in my opinion, responsibly extracting, or it's probably not as simple as having corporations have an agenda that's socially conscious. So the bad news is that we co-create suffering. But that's also the good news, is that we can co-create healing, as we've talked about in our gatherings before. So if it's disconnection, if it's unrelatedness that found and uphold today's suffering in all its manifestations, it means that any act of connection, any act of relating again in our daily lives is globally significant. So I think that's kind of cool, because it means that to smile at one's bus driver is a very important act. And there's a really, I think, wonderful quote by Ruby Bloom. Is that you, Sven? Can you read that for us?
Excuse me. Our small daily actions toward the things that nourish us have an enormous impact. We have to shake off the trance that tells us this is not so. We cannot remake the world in whole, only in part.
What strikes me about Ruby Bloom's quote is we have to shake off the trance, that it's not so, and to really start believing that what we do in our daily lives is the most significant work of changing this mindset of rebelonging. So hi Jeanette, welcome. So this evening and for the next 2 weeks, we'll be exploring what an economy that's based on relatedness, that's based on belonging, looks like. And there's, of course, a movement that's growing and that's coined a term, and it's called a gift economy. And so we have 2 really wonderful speakers that are going to help explore that with us. And so Christine's going to help us, as far as I know, sort of recognize some of this mindset, what it looks like. Because that's one huge step of transitioning away from it, is recognizing it, getting familiar with it, so we can see it and move past it. And Ross is going to help us do some of that fun reimagining work. If this isn't inevitable, well, great. Let's create something new. Now, what I find so moving about a gift economy is that it means that doing what I love is economically viable, and so it suggests that living vocationally would actually be something that simultaneously takes care of all. I find that really difficult to believe, but I like to believe it. It moves me. And so, before I call up Christine, in your groups, share what you've written with each other. What would you do if it was economically viable, or what are you doing if it is economically viable? And then we'll call up Christine. So yeah, share with each other what you've written. And if you haven't written anything, Jeanette, that's okay. Come join the circle. Wonderful. Yeah. So let's meet for just a few seconds. Interesting conversation. So I'm going to call Christine up. Christine Boyle. And first, I guess I don't really want to start the introduction this way, but Christine is joining us even with being a bit sick. So
Not contagious sick.
not contagious, but thank you so much for nonetheless coming. So, and Christine and I have kind of just met. I've seen her present before, and I knew that she would have so much to share with us this evening. So I'm going to read a little bit of an introduction. I wish I could just spill it off, but not yet. So Christine is a community organizer and communicator, raised on Coast Salish territory in Vancouver. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Urban Agriculture and First Nation Studies from UBC, and an MA in Religious Leadership for Social Change from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Over the years, she's worked for the Vancouver School Board, Vancouver Coastal Health, and the United Church of Canada. She has coordinated local community gardens, facilitated community kitchens, taught yoga, led youth retreats, ran workshops on justice issues, spent lots of time chatting with people about their feelings and fed hundreds of people at conferences, workshops, and in her home. And currently, Christine leads strategic communications at the Columbia Institute and the Center for Civic Governance. And she also organizes with Green Jobs BC and directs Spirited Social Change, one of the sponsors of this effort. And in her free time, she rides her bicycle and enjoys the company of courageous people. So, Christine, thanks so much for being with us. And
Thank you for
yeah,
having me. Do you want me to stand up here?
whatever you want. What do you
Stand
prefer?
up here. Cool. Can I ask, when we start to do a little brainstorming, you look like you have me writing.
Sure.
Can I get you to write?
Yeah.
That would be great.
I'd
Then I
love to.
can nod, then I can chat. So thank you for having me here. I love coming to events that are relationship and conversation based and that carry on for a while like this, and I wish I could have joined you for more sessions before this so that I was coming into it knowing more of you, but I am happy to get to be here. I thought I should start off by admitting, as you might be able to tell from my bio, that I am not an economist. My background is in urban agriculture and then theology, which I think is a very sensible path of things that connect to each other, but my parents might disagree with you on that front. I'm not an economist, but I married an economist, and so I feel like I'm being homeschooled in the subject, whether I like it or not, all of the time. And so I thought I would say my partner had to leave, but one of our first meetings was at this workshop that he was leading through the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives on a kind of economics 101, and we were riding the elevator up together, and I said, you know, whenever economics comes up in my family, and we have a whole mix of views at the dinner table. He said, whenever economics comes up in my family, because it's not my subject, I change the conversation to values, because that's where I can go more comfortably, and so that's my sort of cheat out of having to talk about or understand economics, and he very generously said, well, that's an important part of the conversation, and let me off the hook on that, even though I still had to go through this Economics 101 class. And so eventually we co-wrote this article together a little while ago on a moral economy, which was a sort of bringing together of my theological background and his economic background, and it's been a really interesting process to see the truth in the connection between talking about values and talking about economics, and the importance of all of us being able to do that more. I see lots of examples of small projects that are experimenting with new economic models, and I think that's really important. That's how we figure out what can work, and we experience alternatives so that we know there can be alternatives. And I also think it's really necessary to understand the larger economic system that we're existing in, so that while we're creating alternatives and experimenting with them, we're also challenging the larger system and trying to change it at the same time. So I wanted to start, just so I know the crowd a little, asking if anyone has ever taken an economics class. Like formally in a academic setting or a community setting like the CCPA, or a handful of people. Okay, great. That's a good mix, actually. I think that will be useful. So what I wanted to start us off with is doing some brainstorming on myths of an extractive economy. The stories that we get told about why we need why we need an extractive economy, or why this is. My intro is that I think the most giant myth of the extractive economy is that there's no alternative economy. That is the big underlying myth that keeps it going, is that there is no alternative. But I wanted us to brainstorm a bit more on myths of an extractive economy, and then we're going to talk about alternatives. So maybe I'll get you to write. I had to do some brainstorming on this myself before I came, because my brain's a little slow lately. So, but I don't think you'll need my cheat sheet.
Are you meaning sort of things myths like more is better?
Yeah,
That kind of
exactly.
stuff? Okay.
The stories of
Yeah, okay.
what hold up this,
But when you say myth, do you mean falsehood?
Yeah. or assumption. Yeah, I don't think it.
Some myths are true.
Yeah. So I would say some of them could be falsehoods. Some of us might feel like that's a falsehood. I don't mean falsehood exclusively, but I mean
Okay, so
the sort of
assumptions.
stories, assumptions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another one is, and this is straight from Lynn Twist, who wrote Soul of Money, she talks about more is better, and also the other thing that goes with that is, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Great.
We all want plastics for our cell phones and computers.
Yeah.
We need plastics.
Yeah, that we need it, that in some way our need for the resources is the sole driver, rather than being in a kind of cyclical relationship with the need reinforcing the economy, which reinforces the need.
Constant expansion within the economy is possible.
Yeah.
And necessary. This is
Yeah, the
growth
growth
is
is
necessary.
very necessary. Yeah.
And that is good.
Yeah.
Possible, sustainable.
Yeah, the growth is sustainable. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, just that's a buzzword, sustainable.
Yeah.
To maintain our standard of living.
Yes. Yeah, it always strikes me that there is a lot that I, in fact, don't think we should sustain within that frame.
Well, there's a,
I'm just stunned by the proliferation of cell phones and things like that. And it seems to me that the myth there is we need to be connected all the time.
Huh.
And I consider it to be anxiety, I suppose.
Huh.
I mean, I don't, it's nice to be connected, but do I need to be connected?
Yeah.
Somehow I think it's human anxiety that fuels that. And the, I mean, there's components, I forget the name of the minerals, but there's components in our cell phones that are very expensive and are mined in only in this world.
Yeah, there's something in there to me too about conflating our wants to our needs.
Yeah.
Like the commercial that sign up this plan and you will get the newest version every time they come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you always have to have the
Yeah.
newest.
It has to do with parents' anxieties about their children.
Yeah.
It has to do with, we just need to be in each other's heads all the time, or something like that.
An unfettered economy is good. So like free market is the most efficient, is the economic translation.
Yeah. And that efficiency is the
That's
highest.
That's the ultimate
the God.
goal, is the
Yeah.
most efficient thing.
Yeah.
And also,
Yeah.
just because we can do it,
God.
that, that leads to, that we should do it, especially in terms of making technology like over-engineered. Sometimes it's just, we don't need it to be that engineered, but we end up getting it because it's always the thing lead to innovation.
Yeah.
It would be good enough to have, like a two-wheel bike. You don't need like super duper
Yeah.
fancy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Which seems similar in a whole different way to me to the growth is good idea, that there sort of, and more is better, like that we always need to get fancier and.
well, there's the idea that a new economy would be painful is a myth, but we've been sold a bill of goods that the message of fulfillment that used to come from religion are now coming from the advertising agency.
A new economy would be painful, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple. One would be that it was alluded to already, the free market, that somehow the hand of the free market has some kind of almost divine power to make things right. I mean, if we just let the free market have its own way, it will work everything out.
Yeah.
And just the way it's supposed to be. And then another myth that's a theological myth, but some groups certainly do subscribe to it, is that it's why God gave us the earth and all the resources in the earth is for us to use, to exploit, essentially.
The biggest myth in that one is that the term dominion over all the earth has been translated as we can take whatever we want and destroy whatever we want.
Subjugation.
Yeah.
Right.
Subjugation.
But the grievous theological error there is a misunderstanding of the power of God as infinite control, and man made in the image of God is having infinite control over the earth. Sally McFaig deals with that really well in her new book. But that's Jay Lynn White Jr. writing in the '60s said that domination was the reason for the destruction of the earth. But it's a much deeper thing than that, because you can easily say it's a mistranslation of Genesis, and lots of scholars have done that. It is a mistranslation. But really, they just be fruitful and multiply. Well, we've done that too.
I remember hearing a theologian from the States say that God hid oil in the ground for us to find and use, and he would be sad if we didn't. And I laughed out loud. But it wasn't a joke. It wasn't a joke. It was a very real mindset.
And what often goes with that theology is a theology of the end time, that that this earth really doesn't matter. Because we're heading to the rapture or whatever, something beyond this earth, and so as long as you believe, you will be part of that bliss to come, and to really be too environmentally focused is idolatry in that view. It's pagan idolatry.
Yeah, well, that's the classic science fiction movie plot where you've got the extraterrestrial colonizing the human body on its way to a better place.
Heather.
I'm Rian.
Rian. Oh, I was seeing teacher and reading Heather. Got it. Rian.
I do that all the time.
Okay. Like it. Anyway,
The price tag represents the real cost and the true value.
for sure.
Yeah. Good one.
And cheaper is better.
Well,
Or very expensive is better.
Yes, it's true. But one or the other.
Carmel, the yellow doesn't show up.
Okay, I just wanted to, make it,
yeah, gonna have to double up.
all right.
How about brown?
But there's also something else alluding to what I think Wes was saying, was it's about dominion versus stewardship. Like, dominion is like, to me, exploiting and just raping and pillaging, where stewardship is taking care of. And I think that's where the two different mindsets are.
Well, I think stewardship is also a power relationship that suggests we have some control over the 4.7 billion-year-old planet, which is really arrogance and stupidity, if you wanted to look at it that way. I mean, we try to do our best to look after the relatives, and but stewardship, no, don't buy it.
I had a discussion with one of my clients one time, talking about this, and he says, well, God gave us dominion over the earth, and we should be able to do it. I says, I think you should give your son dominion over your resources. And he didn't think very much of that idea.
It seems a conversation about power over and power with and what that, and I think there's lots of, as with lots of these words, as with sustainability, there's lots of understandings of stewardship that would see it as a power with and a relational caring.
I just think
Collaboration. Dominion, which is power over, versus stewardship, which is collaboration.
And that collaboration, I think, is a really useful word too.
But I think
Go back,
we really need responsibility too.
But the thing is, like, when you talk about power over, you can define it as responsibility for, or as dominion over, you know, or domination of, so responsibility for or domination. You know, so it's just the way you define power over.
Yeah, and the parent example is a useful one in that you, I mean, I'm just learning, I have a 10-year-old daughter, I wouldn't always have power with her. There are times when I am in charge and it's time to not eat chocolate and go to bed. But as she grows up, that shifts
In a couple of years, she'll be.
more. And there are times when I'm clearly not in charge, whether I like it or not. Yeah. Brianne?
Two things. Taxes are bad for the economy. The other one is saving money is bad for the economy. Or also, you should save money. We can look at it different ways. You know, what is saving money?
Yeah, but there's certainly a piece we saw this after 9/11, a piece about consumerism being good for,
It's patriotic.
yeah, and that's how we care for each other by
Buying
supporting
things.
the economy, by buying things. Yeah, there's a
You
whole,
shouldn't be saving, you should be investing.
But sure it is, but here's a question. Why then are the International Monetary Fund and the governments of Europe and the world driving people below the poverty line? Because people who are driven below the poverty line don't consume. And this would seem from a capitalist point of view to be sniggering insanity. I mean, all right, you want to create a labor force that is really hungry and willing to work for practically nothing, but if they have no disposable income, there's a real danger that they may start to try and find their fulfillment in something outside the consumer economy, so that these idiots may just outsmart themselves. And I take that as a kind of sign of hope.
I'd like to address this about mentioning IMF. The IMF works in conjunction with the World Bank.
Well, the three, yes.
And it's the World Bank, the IMF are part of the United Nations system. I've had arguments about this. They have said that it's not part of the United Nations. Yeah, you look in the World Book Encyclopedia, you have a flow chart of UN thing. They call it something called the United Nations system. They get to have it both ways. What it is that Robert McNamara was president of the World Bank from 1968 to 1981. He worked the institution completely. The third world is imprisoned by the debt that he started. He wrongfully used his presidency. The last thing he did in 1981 was he signed a contract to do cattle ranching in the Amazon rainforest, which was to clear off jungle and you raise cattle. A lot of the beef went to McDonald's. Now in 1987 approximately, the United Nations said it's our common future. They were saying, oh, deforestation, the Amazon rainforest. Well, you have an affiliation UN agency that was really part of that. India was made a few years ago to accept Coca-Cola, the corporation that come into its country, where they took water from farmers. The drink Coca-Cola had actual pesticides in some cases in India. They stopped doing that. There was, but you see, the IMF said that India had to accept Coca-Cola, the corporation, to be in India, which doesn't make any sense because if it was farm, for example, if it was a corporation making farm scenery, that would make sense. You can make a carbonated drink quite easily that appropriates Coca-Cola. I mean, if India had its own company doing the carbonated drink like Coca-Cola, this is what's going on.
So there's a piece about, like, one of the things that came to me listening to you was about the corporations as people piece, or the sort of dominant rights of corporations over people.
No, the point I'm making is that whether it fits exactly with your, I think it fits in a sense. I'm saying what's going on. I mean, the problem with this world is the way that the United Nations World Bank and International Monetary systems run, which it acted properly from 1944 to 1968, the World Bank.
Yeah.
It started to act totally improperly, starting in 1968 when Robert McNamara was the president. Now the other thing I'm going to just, whether this is a bit of a disjointed statement, it's going to be a quick one. Haiti was in trouble before the earthquake. In 2003 approximately, UN peacekeepers were in charge of that country. Now, when you have something like a UN peace force, you have no way, like we have the government here, we have the city government, provincial government, we have elections, we have some place to go to City Hall, that's right there. Haiti hasn't. It's just they want to have that a free, cheap labor zone. That's what it is. And the earthquake, all that money has been wasted. Bill Clinton is an actual criminal. He has been part of this. He has acted like a criminal. What he's done with Haiti, it is to have a cheap labor zone, that other zones get cheap labor. But when you talk about that we are very alienated from extraction society and so on, there is no way here in Vancouver you can actually go to the United Nations on something, because there's something called the United Nations Association in Canada. Well, it winds up the United Nations Association Canada is not part of the United Nations. That's what they told me. The other thing what they told me about it was that that you were not allowed to know what goes on in their meetings. They have closed meetings. And you can join them up for $20 a year or whatever it is, and you just get something sent to you. And yet they'll tell you that's not part of the United Nations. So anyway, whether I made a bit some disjointed statements, but you know, it's part of the extraction. What you say, I mean, the extraction could be well enough good, but it goes a bit too far.
One thing I think about when you're talking about that is how me as an individual, there's all these big things happening out of the world with big players that we don't necessarily agree with. But me as an individual, a myth I have is I have no power to change that.
Yeah.
I think that another myth I want to get up here is around jobs. That often when I'm having this conversation about an extractive economy, what I hear coming back, and this especially comes up in the green economy work that I do in BC, that we need the jobs, and so we just have to keep on this path. And in fact, the number of jobs that get created out of less harmful resources like solar are way higher, or energy retrofits of buildings, way higher job creation than fracking. But the myth is about this need for a certain kind of jobs. Yes.
So a couple more would be newer is better.
Yeah.
So,
I think we get.
do we have that?
We've got it.
Okay, and then
That's a good echo.
the other one is the more we buy or the more we consume, the happier we're going to be.
Sounds like a song.
Can I I read these off for us, or any more coming in?
I have one more.
Yeah,
It's two sides of the coin again. Debt is bad, but debt is good.
yes.
That's right, debt is bad is good.
That is bad is good. So,
And I want to add on the efficiency piece that I often hear that I think this came up a bit, that the private sector is the most efficient, that that's always the way to go about doing things.
I'm just curious, a phrase that keeps coming to mind, and I don't know, it's a myth or how exactly it fits here, isn't it planned obsolescence? How does that fit into something like this? Because, one of the things we'll find that obsolescence of stuff we buy nowadays just goes faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. So, does that get in here somewhere?
It was better.
Yeah, well, it sort of fits with what you were saying, this cycle, well, this idea that we need more, we need newer things in order to keep up with people, to be connecting, that.
But it is very aggravating to buy a toaster and have to throw it out in 9 months.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's nobody that can, nobody can fix it anymore.
No, it's cheaper, you don't buy it and get it repaired.
It's cheaper to buy new.
Yeah.
I too, I'm sorry. Actually, it was a meeting, actually, I recognize someone. This was a meeting, a week, it was on a Sunday, not this Sunday, previous one. I think there's an important statement, is that we saw a video, the candle line, they had temporary workers being paid $3.50 an hour to take up the candle line. So you have this thing where a lot of important jobs are just being done, like, you should all be employed doing something, and yet you find a way to get, minimum wage would be too little, in my opinion, digging up underground candle. This is what's going on. They're sort of finding ways. They get temporary workers. I mean, for the candle line, you wouldn't have thought that would have happened, but that's what happened. They got temporary workers from outside of Canada who weren't to become citizens of Canada, come here and dig up the candle line for $3.50 an hour instead of them following employment or having that type of work to be done at the wages should be spent or should be paid for.
So what I think about when I hear you talk about that is, like the myth behind that I see is, there's not much black market out there. That would be a myth. Like, we don't think of the black market, which is below minimum wage people. It's also.
No, this was totally legal. It was
Well,
totally
and that there's this whole
legitimate.
piece about, someone else mentioned that the free market creates this sort of perfect system, but we don't, then we cheat even the free market with something like the temporary foreign worker system, but you had a.
No, it was just related to a point prior to this, was just, I don't know, in the economics, we talk about supply and demand, and back, when I was in university, it seemed like it was more balanced. Now it seems like the supply is way faster than the demand with this whole planned obsolescence thing. It's even before
Dollar stores.
we know if we want it or not, or if we need it or not. It's coming to us. But then this is in total contradiction to the other perspective of when we are in limited resources.
Right.
And so this disconnect and this paradox, that it's.
So one of the myths I heard from you, that I think about it is,
Yeah.
lots of choices is good.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of choices are good.
I think one of the things we're talking about too, is a phrase that comes to mind that I think is a myth, is a rising tide floats all boats.
Yeah.
And the other half of yours was something like, buying is good for the world.
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly. Consume to take care of, or consume equals happiness. Yeah. And the trickle down, it does trickle down.
Yeah,
instead of-
rising tide floats all boats.
Well, I like to make.
So can you keep it brief, because we're going to move on.
Well, okay, here's like a myth is that
if you can't read it. So we've got taxes is bad for the economy, debt is bad is good. Money can equate true value, that our wants are our needs, jobs in general. More is better, which has to do with the consume, we consume to take care of, or we consume to be happy. New is better, that there is no black market. That efficiency is the ultimate ideal, it is God. And we have a free market that was related to that, and then that the private sector is the most efficient. The phrase that we need it, that I have no power, that choice, again, is the ultimate, that growth and progress is good, that this is actually sustainable, and that, we need to be connected 24/7, that trickle down does actually trickle down, and that it's, that this is for our use, our world, and at least there's a heaven.
I hope we just bring more, yeah.
And the one you missed is just the way it is.
Just the way it is.
Yeah,
And that's the one I think we started with.
yeah, which I think is a nice place to go back to, that, I have a lot of these conversations with folks across all kinds of spectrums, and what I frequently see, either I come up against in a conversation, is someone telling me, well, there's no alternative, or I hear people who want there to be an alternative saying in a kind of state of exhaustion or despair, like, well, it will never be different, it will never be other than this. And so the biggest myth of these myths that I want to name and keep resisting is that there is no alternative, because of course there are alternatives. There were alternatives before this system, not just in the indigenous communities and networks and livelihoods that were sustained on this very land, but there were alternatives. There have been many alternatives since then, and we seem to be stuck in a state globally where this is what we're taught is the only way. Certainly in my lifetime, I have been taught that this extractive economy is the only way. I just want to do a time check, because I think we'll get into more of the alternatives in our conversations with Ross.
Yeah, where are you at in terms of wanting to have?
I can wrap. I can keep going forever.
Yeah. Well, I think
I can wrap up too.
Yeah, I think it would be good to transition
And it's sort of a nice.
into some of those alternatives, and if you can,
Yeah, so I thought I would say as a transition, think the gift economy is one really interesting model, as is. I heard a presentation at an event a couple weeks ago about the sharing economy in Vancouver, the growth of co-ops and sharing tool libraries and these book libraries you see on the street that are just open, a kind of growth of those mini examples of a sharing economy. When Seth and I were writing our moral economy article, we kept coming up against, and the folks doing editing for us were challenging us on how is this different than a just economy, for which there's been a lot of writing and really worthwhile work, or a fair economy. There are, I think, lots of examples, some of which are really very lived and some of which are more theoretical challenges to extraction, but lots of alternatives that are being created and discussed. So I thought I would read our definition of a moral economy that we came to was that a moral economy is one in which people don't feel they have to sacrifice their values, harm human dignity, or compromise ecological health in order to achieve economic security. Yeah, that was, and I think, it's it's a bit different in the language of morality and of what that invites to the conversation, but it certainly shares a lot of commonalities with a democratic economy, a fair economy, a gift economy. All of these things bring common pieces together, and I think, for me, what's more important than the language we land on using is the values that brought us to that, and the way that those different ideas can fit together to not just be alternatives on a tiny scale, but to be challenges to the larger system at both end at the same time.
How about economics as if people mattered?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's a good one. And as if the land mattered.
As if non-humans mattered.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Ross take it from there, and I'm so thrilled to get to be here with him and share this.
Yeah, thanks. And so I'm actually gonna, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
Because I see that you are a yoga-er.
Oh,
And
yes.
so, for all of our sakes, I'm wondering if you could maybe lead us through 2 very quick movements that get us up out of our chairs for a second.
Yeah.
While I call on Rhiannon, who's going to introduce Ross, and
Sure.
Ross as well. And meanwhile, I'm going to write out that awesome definition.
So I'm sure a bunch of you were at the TRC this year. Justice Sinclair, on the opening day, before he spoke, there had been a bunch of speakers, and he said, I'm going to get you all to stand up and shake it off a little, because the last thing I want while I'm speaking is you thinking about your bums hurting. Which I think is as good a reason as any to get people standing up. I mean, actually, you know, the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition has this very hilarious, I don't know what they call it, anti-extraction gymnastics that they lead youth in, which I wish I knew, and it gets led by people with more energy than me in a very funny way. But some of it is that they do a kind of reaching for a better world, and really like not just stretching, but really going for it. Really like you mean it, reaching up to the sky, and then reaching down to honor the ground. And like it might be just or near the ground, whatever is within your limits, and then for a little touch of youthful enthusiasm, they also do a kind of chanting and protesting exercise. Yeah, good. It's clearly a crowd that can handle that. But I will not make you go through the whole of the routine. Thank you for moving it around a little.
Thanks, Christine.
So I'm just going to briefly introduce Ross. Ross hails from California. He's got a background in small business and cooperatives and other social activism. And he tells a story about, speak up a little bit. Sure. He tells a story about 6 years ago when he moved here from California. He didn't know a lot of people, so he just decided to invite anybody in the neighborhood to come over for spaghetti. And it turned into a tradition, which has continued and blossomed into a whole movement called Village Vancouver. And so Ross has been, I don't know if you were the only founder, but definitely he's the longest standing person, most active in this movement. And it's attached to the Transition Town movement, which is about building resilient communities, more sustainable communities where people are connected. And part of that, again, is these spaghetti nights that happen all across the city now. Because once he started doing his spaghetti nights, he noticed that people started connecting and creating projects, and that just turned into Village Vancouver. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're talking about differences between organizing and the US and Canada. And I think one of the differences, being from the States, I don't have to be as modest. I can say, yes, I am a founder of Village. And I'm also glad that I asked about the title of the talk, because for the first month, I was reading it as Extractivism. And I said, yeah, you know, I work 60 hours a week. It's about activism. I can really talk to that because that's what I do. So I know it's extract. Just in time. And there's a lot
Next
of
time, Ross.
next time. Actually, there's something at work here because I actually got my start in this room 7 years ago. So there was this thing with this church a few blocks away where neighbors were complaining about them feeding the homeless. This was about 6 or 7 years ago. Some of you may remember that. And I was working with I came to Canada. My dad's from Canada, but I grew up in the States in Los Angeles. And I came up here, started coming up here as a teenager, and just always wanted to live in Vancouver, but it took me about 25 years to get here. And then when I came here, I was pretty burned out. I was running an organic food co-op in Venice Beach for about 20 years. And I took it relatively easy for a few years, and I started getting the activist itch again. And the first thing I did, I got involved with this fellow named Bill Chu, who was trying to take on this issue of this church having trouble.
He was a minister.
Yeah.
Is
So
that 10th Alliance?
Yeah. And so the press conference was here. And that was like the first time I spoke in public in Canada. And it was actually, I celebrated Passover, and it's Passover now, so it's a wonderful Jewish holiday. It's a liberation holiday, and it's an example of people getting together to collaborate to throw off their oppressors. So it was during Passover. So tremendous, synchronicity, because I don't think I've been back here since, and that was about 7 years ago, and the timing is perfect. So it's great. And we're Village Vancouver is actually one of the sponsors, and this is my first chance though, because we just very seem to have other things going on Tuesday nights. So I'm just really happy to be here, and we're so happy to be sponsors and one of the sponsors. So thanks. So we're part of. So Village Vancouver started in 2007. I actually, as I was getting that kind of activist itch again, I was trying to figure out how I wanted to re-engage. And I've always been a student of how people learn and how we engage in social change, but especially effective social change, because I see a lot of people trying to do things, but not necessarily being effective at it. And so I kind of wanted to get really involved again, but not just kind of spin my wheels, not just end up burning out and stuff like that. So I spent about a year thinking about that and came up with this idea of Village Vancouver. And then the whole idea was based on trying to figure out what the commonalities that would reach out and appeal to people, because it's really easy, like, if you're involved in, ecological work or environmental work, to kind of, preaching to the converted is the easy stuff. It's like, how do you go beyond that? How do you get beyond the green belt? So one of the things I realized, and this is kind of where Drop-In Spaghetti Nights came out of, was people like to have fun, they like to celebrate, they like to get together around food. So that's one of the bases for Village Vancouver. We kind of take the idea of an organization and we turn it inside out, in that lots of times when you join something, there's already a preset agenda. So your opportunities may be like if you have some ideas about something that you want to do, they're not necessarily there for you to, there's not necessarily a way for you to get involved or engaged. With Village, it's more like, what are you interested in? How can we help you do it? And of course, we focus on things like connecting people in community, and particularly around helping people be more sustainable, helping communities be more resilient. So this thing kind of got started, and we're kind of running around doing all these different things. And yeah, like Rhiannon said, it's like I had gotten married, and we didn't know many people, but we were pretty fearless about just we'd be in line at a movie, we start talking to people, inviting them over, and just kind of build from there. And then we heard about the transition movement, which started in England 2006, so just the year before. It was really new. And again, because I come from the States, I get to say that my original objective was to take the Village Vancouver model and export it to the world. But when we heard about transition towns, we said, oh great, this is already happening, there's so many similarities, so we don't have to do that. So, which felt really good because I really like to focus local. We affiliated with them and they accepted us right away, and we've kind of been on our merry way ever since. Transition towns look at things like climate change, and they look at peaking resources, the fact that obviously we're on a finite planet with finite resources, and things like the world economy kind of looking increasingly like a house of cards that's about to collapse, or really has collapsed, but probably will collapse further. But it looks at it from a very localized perspective, and from the perspective that if we keep looking to our governments to solve our problems, like think about every time there's a climate change conference, I always have high hopes, and I think a lot of us probably do. But we always come out really disappointed. Nothing really ever seems to get done. So it's basically, it's like, we can't wait any longer, for somebody else to solve our problems. We need to kind of do it ourselves. So those are kind of the big words, but what it really boils down to, from our perspective, is how can we create those alternatives? Look at what is, but also imagine what we would like it to be, and what would that look like? And how do we do that hopefully in a way as quickly as possible given the circumstances, and what would that look like? So I'm not going to speak too much longer because really you're going to provide all the answers tonight. I'm just going to give you a few clues. And so in a few minutes we're going to break out into little groups where you're going to imagine your ideal neighborhood. And you notice I haven't spoken specifically, I haven't used the E word, the economy word too much. And the reason for that is what I want to focus on. So I have a background in small business. Village organizes all sorts of stuff. I mean, we have ecological economics classes. We organize conferences like New Economic Summit last year at UBC with 300 or 400 people. We participate in Living the New Economy. We do a lot of that stuff, but that's kind of the talky stuff. What I'm most interested in tonight is what does it look like? So when I talk about the idea of economy, I'm not talking about like from my business background where although this is obviously an important part of it, where you go out and you start a new business or you start a cooperative. But the idea that everything we do can be said to have, some kind of economic value. And so in Village, we engage all the time, in my mind at least, in things like economic activity, even if we don't think of it as such. And we do an awful lot of it. We are literally you can go to the website, it's villagevancouver.ca, and we have thousands and thousands of members in our network. We literally do about 300 activities a year. And we do this all with almost no budget, so our budget is under $10,000 a year. But yet, I would argue that we're economically very rich because we have all this people power. So that's the kind of things that I would like us to focus on tonight, and to say, like, when we do so we just started for instance, a new dinner group in Kitsilano where a dozen households and it's our second one, and it looks like we're going to start a third one. Dozen households get together once a month for dinner. One person cooks the dinner, everybody else kind of shows up, which is actually my favorite way of doing things because I always find with potlucks, I never have time to make anything, so I'm always the one that's bringing like the aseptic package of almond milk or something like that. So I feel a lot better when I'm not expected to bring anything. I can just kind of show up, and then I have to cook once a year. But think about it. It's the same thing like with drop-in spaghetti nights. When we started doing them, we were doing them for fun. We just thought, oh, you know, we just want to bring a bunch of people together and cook a meal. And then about 2 days later, we realized if everybody had stayed home and cooked the meal on their own stove or in their own oven, think of the difference like in the carbon footprint, the amount of energy that was used. So we kind of stumbled on this fun way of helping everybody reduce their carbon footprint without even thinking about it. So because we serve garlic bread, we call those garlic bread solutions. And we always try to keep that in mind in villages, like creating this new alternative is not going to be like we're all going to be miserable, wet and cold, sitting and huddled around fires in caves. You know, we think it's actually going to be better. Okay? We just happen to think that it's going to be a lot more fulfilling, and it's going to use a lot less energy. It's going to be a lot less dependent on fossil fuels, that kind of stuff.
And save a lot of time.
And save a lot of time.
Wow.
And address the idea of the person that says, I don't have time to do this. Well, okay, so you don't have time to walk down the street and eat a meal that your neighbors prepared for you? Well, you know, so we try and overcome those barriers. So when we talk about economics in the village, there's this whole thing that whatever you do has some economic value, and there's all these little ways you can do it that are fun, that don't take a lot of money, and kind of nourish us, you know, because they kind of encourage this kind of connectivity. So the spaghetti nights are one example, and now we're kind of demonstrating how you can do little localized versions of food systems with them, because we have seed libraries, we provide seeds, so you can grow your own spaghetti night dinner. The idea with a spaghetti night is a neighbor will cook a meal for maybe a dozen other neighbors, or how many people you want to, that live maybe within 2 or 3 blocks of you, that you may not know, but we know, and we want to connect you. And then we'll do that 2 or 3 times in the same neighborhood. So people come together, and that's kind of where everything kind of tends to start. So you can get the seeds. In kits, you can go, we have like a collaborative garden. We provided fruits and vegetables for most of the dinners, so it becomes a very local dinner. It could be like a 2-block dinner if you live that close. We have a plastic recycling depot for stuff that the city doesn't take. So if you have any packaging, you can recycle it locally. We have food scrap drop spots, so you can compost your food scrap drop spots. So this is all within a neighborhood. And when you start teasing this out and looking at what's involved compared to when you're going to the supermarket and buying food from 3,000 miles away, when you start looking at, you know, the amount of energy that's involved in that, you know, the food being trucked and warehoused and stored, people having to drive, you know, many miles to get to their jobs, and you know, where are the materials coming from? You know, this speaks to the resource extraction. It seems like we're always exploiting some majority world country at some point or another for resource extraction. So comparatively speaking, it's a phenomenal alternative to that kind of just kind of using up everything. If you look in the dictionary, one of the definitions of to consume is to destroy. So when you're a consumer, you're a destroyer. So I like to think of us as prosumers, where we're creating stuff. So yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing in Village, and we're extremely active. I mentioned it, but we do over 300 activities a year. And I think what I'd like to do now, I can take some questions, or we can go into some breakout groups, and I can kind of describe. So whatever people want to do, I can take a couple questions first, or
just a question. You talked about the definition of dictionary definition of consumer. What's the root of the word economy? Isn't it like?
It comes out of ecology.
And household.
It's a household. Yeah. Yeah. So we know very well, I mean, whoever said that the economy is a subset of the ecology, yeah. We don't always realize that.
Ross, I'd love to hear your thoughts on one of the myths I think I hear a lot of is when you suggest that, well, maybe there is an alternative, that a gift economy could be a different way of organizing ourselves. You know, one of the first, I think, arguments that I would get back would be, well, how do we provide things like healthcare, and how do we, those big, basic needs, I think is what stops a lot of people from doing that reimagining. So what are your thoughts on some of those myths?
I think a lot of them are just mindsets. Like I have a postcard at home that says, gravity, it's the law. And then at the bottom it says, this announcement provided in association with the physical laws of the universe. Well, this idea, and I think this comes from Bill McKibben, that growth, or that we have to be uber consumers, that's not the law. That's just a habit, I mean, we picked up a lot of bad habits along the way. They're very entrenched habits, but they're not physical laws of the universe. They're just things that we're doing, and we're just as capable of changing. I'm not directly answering your question, but I'm kind of in a big way. And we also have to realize that this is a relatively new phenomenon. This uber consumerism stuff mostly came after World War II, which is where planned obsolescence also came in the late 40s, early 50s, partially because you had GIs returning. We had a conserver society. We stopped making cars for a couple of years. We had tons of victory gardens, so we know it's possible to change really quickly. And then you have millions of GIs coming back to the society where nobody's really consuming stuff because everything went into the war effort, because we realized that was important at that point. And so, Madison Avenue, and if you haven't seen Mad Men, it's a great, put a plug in for that, it's a great series. Madison Avenue is thinking, well, how do we get people to start consuming? But we've kind of bought into that lock, stock, and barrel, but we forget it didn't always exist. I mean, growth economies weren't always the norm. I mean, for most of history, they were not the norm. So I think any of these things, I was at a cooperative conference once in Victoria, and somebody was saying, well, we can do co-ops for everything, but we could never have a cooperative company that made airplanes. And then somebody else said, well, why not? Well, why not?
Yeah.
So we have, for instance, very big, state of Washington, very big health cooperatives. It's like, why not?
I think that's really helpful to me. Often having those comments come back would be, well, why not? And to sort of continue that really reimagine to a very profound way. Yeah.
So and I don't want to over-idealize it, but I mean, really, why not? So I think, how much time do we have?
Well, I know Rhiannon has a question, and then
I'm curious about hearing more about the gift economy, whether it comes from you or whether from the discussion group or people's comments or whatever.
So that may be something that people might want to delve into deeper. So for me, I'm hearing in the last few years, gift economy or collaborative economy or sharing economy. My frame is like, it's probably the cooperative economy, because I've been involved with co-ops for 40 years, and so I see a lot of similarities there. I mean, different terms for something similar.
I didn't know if it was like, these were all different things, or if it was all kind of the same.
I think it's similar. I mean, not exactly. When I say co-ops, I mean a lot of it is formal co-ops, and there's really big co-ops. But that whole idea of people collaborating on a local level, so like with the seed library, very simple concept. You're growing some stuff, so when things go to seed at the end of the season, bring us some seeds, and then take some seeds that you're going to need, maybe for either growing next year. So it's this kind of thing that just kind of keeps going, where we're giving to one another in a sharing kind of way. In that particular case, it's not a monetary kind of way, but it's obviously an economic transaction. So I don't know if that speaks exactly to what you're asking. But
I don't know if there's one answer either.
I mean, that's kind of my interpretation, is like, when we do these exchanges, whether we think it or not, there's an economic kind of a transaction going on. But there's also, I think, a nourishing going on because we're not, our motive for doing it is not necessarily to make a profit, it's to meet more of our basic needs.
Now, you said this about the, here in Vancouver, a seed, what exactly?
Seed library, we have several of them actually, yeah.
So I can come to you and get some seeds?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the idea with that is like, you know, I mean, think about any time you've bought a package of seeds, particularly the ones that have like 1,000 seeds in them. Did you ever use the whole package?
Well, I hope you know about this Monsanto Corporation wants to patent. But do you know about this?
Oh yeah, yeah, GMOs.
You know that the Bill Gates Foundation is in collaboration with the Monsanto Corporation right now.
Okay.
Are you aware of that?
I don't know. I haven't really been there, so I may have heard of that or something.
And they want to patent the seeds, in fact, that Canadian farmer.
Yeah, yeah.
Because someone else's seeds blew into his land.
Yeah,
Monsanto
yeah,
seeds.
it's an interesting application of judicial logic. Illogic. Yeah.
So I'm just sort of looking at the time that we have, and I know one thing that Ross was hoping to do with us was to have some time for maybe in groups of 3 groups, and to sort of take 10 minutes to
Yeah.
begin imagining sort of what that means.
Yeah, so actually, yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things in Village is you don't want to listen to me tell you what you should be doing, and I don't do that in Village. It's like, what are you interested in? What do you think it looks like? What would in your ideal neighborhood, what would your ideal local economy look like? What are those kind of things that you'd be interested in seeing kind of manifest, that you'd be interested in doing? So, yeah, I'd like to do some breakout groups, maybe 5 breakout groups. And we want to give them some...
Could we maybe do 4, because we have
4?
4 tables?
Yeah.
And I do have sheets of paper.
So we're going to give you some paper.
Yeah, and crayons.
And you're going to create your own village actually in 10 minutes. And then we're going to do report back. So the only rules are listen respectfully to one another. And you're going to come up with a name for your village. And then you're going to figure out who or how you want to do report back. And you can do this in any way you want. You can write down ideas. You can report back with a song and dance. You can do whatever you want.
Just to reiterate, the rules would be to name your village, and to start thinking of how that could actually work. And that kind of gets back to your question, Rhiannon, about like what is a gift economy, and my understanding of it, and sort of coming back to our introduction, sort of connecting all these dots that we've explored tonight, is that it's an economy that, because you know your place and you know your community, it's small enough that you know it. You'll get to know that Mark would be a runner if it was economically viable, or that's something that he loves to do, and you would start to get to know each other's gifts, and then also the needs within your community. And when it's small enough, because small is beautiful, then you're also then able to match the need with the gift. So does that maybe help?
Yeah, and so that's, in fact, that's maybe a good way to start if you want. It's like, so when you think about it, there are tons of resources in our community, in our blog, but we tend not to know our neighbors, so we don't know they exist. So maybe one place to start is how do you get to know your neighbors? So you start to learn what's available and take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Great. The only other thing that comes to mind that could help you sort of do this imagining would be to think of it in sort of the 5 sphere of, okay, environmentally, how does that work? Socially, culturally, politically, etc. So anyways, yeah.
And you have 10 minutes, so
La tierra lugar, which stands for the land place. A word that comes up a lot is community and communal. For example, like a communal kitchen with a communal garden to help that out. See, we have an eating area One of the things that I thought, that actually was my suggestion, I thought was actually pretty useful, is I would like a wetlands on this place to sort of, help filter water and all that sort of stuff, and, all that kind of good stuff. What else I got here? One of the things we thought was childcare is everybody's responsibility. Okay, rather than just being, one person, to look after a kid or two, childcare is everybody's responsibility. But like an education system where education just takes place throughout the entire village, if you wish. Like it doesn't just happen in the school, but it takes place throughout the entire village, where everybody is a resource for education and for childcare. The education system, blah, blah, blah. Something similar for a health system. Sorry, yes, okay. Recreation facilities, recreation areas, communal paths and parks for kids, and that would facilitate meetings and discussion, that sort of thing. Lots of green space, not necessarily manicured gardens. What else we got there? Spaces that encourage. Did I miss anything? Anything we could add to that? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay.
Excellent. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing there, and you might want to, as we hear the other two, see what the common characteristics are, or if there are different characteristics. A lot of shared stuff. A lot of collaboration, cooperation, doing things together. I don't think I heard any characteristic where you said, my ideal characteristic is I'm going to do something on myself, or I'm going to be isolated from everyone else, but more the kind of communal stuff. Okay, who would like to go next?
Okay. Come on up.
Okay, the name of our village is West Meadow, and I'll explain that at the end, how we got that. And there is some overlap here. Actually, the first idea that someone mentioned was neighborhood, Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So that got me thinking, Mr. Rogers. So children, songs, familiarity with neighbors. I was going to put magic in there, Mr. Rogers, but got on to other things too. Harmony with the land, gardens, playing fields, school, sacred space, participation, opportunities to interact with each other. Familiarity, we were trying to decide whether familiarity or intimacy. And we thought familiarity is probably there will be some intimacy, but generally what we would aim for is a familiarity, a friendly communal familiarity with one another in the community. At the same time, to recognize differences, that it's not homogeneous, we don't all have to be the same, and to celebrate our differences. Also so that we're not just focused in on ourselves, to have concern for others outside of our community and for the world. Let's see, spaces, outdoor spaces, shared spaces, personal adventures. Okay, probably go back to Mr. Rogers. I think that, needs shared and met. I think that about says it. Now with West Meadow, we didn't come up with a name. We didn't have a name at all. We were running out of time, and I said it's like when our son was born and my wife was in labor, and we didn't have a name for a boy. So we went through the baby book there in the hospital and had to get all the way to the W's for Wesley, which is our son's name. And the name Wesley means from the West Meadow. And Mark jumped on that. West Meadow.
Thank you.
So there I'm hearing a reiteration of doing things together, but also you brought up the aspect of space for personal stuff. I heard mention of nature. So I heard this
discussion, a thing about inclusivity and diversity, because you mentioned children and other types of people, but you also mentioned nature, so maybe you were kind of tending in that direction, that inclusivity is not necessarily always human-centered, that, you know, the natural, and I mean, we're actually part of the natural environment rather than the natural environment, you know, we try to bend it to our will, but really, it's all around us, so we want to be inclusive and respect that. And we haven't heard so far, but another part would be including other species, animal life, that kind of stuff, as part of our community. Okay.
All right, I'd love to stand there, so I'm not blocking out, but you can see. Okay, so our village name is called Looking Forwardville, and it's inspired by a book that you read.
Not only I,
Yeah,
it's
called
Looking Backwards, the name of it.
Yeah, but we didn't want to call it backwards, so we're looking forwardsville. And we talked more about what would it look like, what would we be doing, as opposed to what infrastructure would be there. And it would be for all generations, kids, dogs are good too. And that, because that came up because that in general helps us meet other people in this society. A community hall would be great. We'd have planned gatherings and events and celebrations. We'd have barn raising, which is like shared work parties, and helping each other. We'd be eating together. We'd be preparing and growing food together. We'd have music, live music, and people would be sharing their skills, teaching other people. I'm the teacher, that's why they said you come up here and present. So people would be teaching their gifts to other people who are interested. And it's also based on respect for all. And people would be helping and sharing the work and also the things that they owned, the resources, including lawnmowers. We talked about there's 20 lawnmowers on a block. How often do you use them?
Some friends of mine formed a Mohawk.
A Mohawk. That's great. That's great. And then when you guys presented, I also got inspired by the Mr. Rogers and jotted down personal and shared adventures and experiences. And then we have on the side here, you added right the last
Well,
one.
can I just briefly say the concept?
Sure,
It's
exhibition
well,
halls.
I said exhibition halls, but not just explaining concept of science and technology, but also like you have a certain infrastructure. And I have that, you have a model, and so you're not alienated by how the infrastructure would function. So you would have maybe how the electricity comes in, just some sort of that's just an idea I had. Like you understand how everything functions. So you have an exhibition hall.
So it's more feels like you can own it, or you're home, or you're comfortable with it.
Well,
because you
how
understand how the
the
light
sewage
comes in,
system,
or
or how the plumbing, or how the electricity works,
Yeah.
or your children would.
it makes you closer to the building.
Yeah, you're not alienated by how things function.
That's an interesting idea.
So that was an exhibition hall that would
Yeah.
so.
Great.
Thanks so much.
I kind of want to keep this because it describes it great for me.
It really does. We're gonna keep them right here.
So, yeah, looking backward, the
You know about the book?
was 2000 to 1887, it was by Edward Bellamy, it's a great
You
history.
even knew the author.
You know the literature, yeah. So again, you know, a lot of that sharing stuff, a lot of inclusivity, you mentioned animals this time too, and collaboration. So what are some of, just very briefly, what would you say the most common characteristics are?
A lot of sharing.
Sharing.
Yeah, a sense of togetherness.
Communal. Okay.
All gifts value. I heard that particularly in the sense of in the educational aspect.
Others? So the other one that I see, so when, you'll notice that when I asked you to, I didn't put any restrictions or, you know, any parameters on it. What always strikes me, because I'm always thinking about in the tangible sense, how are we, you know, I was thinking of this book by an artist called Kenneth Patchen called How Then Shall We Live? And within the context of, you know, things like climate change and limited resources, I always think about, well, how do we do all this stuff in a way that we're consuming less, using less energy? So I never told you to create communities that use less energy, but think about all the characteristics of what you've created. And I think if you looked at it, your communities that you just created out of things that you want, not because you had to or you're supposed to, is you're probably using like 50 to 75% less energy. So that happens every single time. So to me, it's like this wonderful thing. It's like, creating community goes hand in hand with creating a better planet that's more realistic in terms of our use of the assets.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. That really leads us back to that myth that an alternative isn't going to be fun, or it's not going to be fulfilling, but yeah, you've really shown us though this evening that it's just the opposite, that that's actually the reason why we have this mindset to begin with. So that's a really neat loop that you've kind of created for us. So with the last little bit of time that we have, I'd love for us to just sort of gather in one large group and the conversation that I invite us to conclude with, rather than we sometimes conclude with different readings but I think it's a good time for us just to begin a conversation about what do we want to see come of this gathering. And I know that the myth that we have is that the number of people in the room is a measure of success, and I don't find that at all. So I don't want that to stop us from considering that what's going on here and the conversations that we're having are really important and really significant. So I'd love for us to have a space just for right now, and we'll do this for our last two gatherings as well, this conversation, but we'll begin it for the last 10 minutes right now is what do you see in this premise, in this gathering, that you want to see continue in some way? What might that look like? What do we want to do with this? So I'd love to hear from everybody, and I'll maybe stay up here and just be writing as I have been this evening. But yeah, if somebody wants to, let's look chart paper out. Have I given you enough direction or non-direction?
How about a question like, what would continuing this energy look like? Like we've had a certain amount of energy and interest and liveliness in our discussions, and what could that look like?
Well, right along, I've always felt, and I guess it's just my background and coming out of the 60s and all that, along with this work that we're doing to become aware of, and expand our consciousness about local and communal living that's in touch with the earth. At the same time, I think we really, I feel I need to, and I think we need to continue to do what we can to say no to those policies and practices that are wreaking so much havoc in the world. And so in that, but to do it in the spirit, and to do it in this spirit though. So to be specific, the Defend Our Climate, Defend Our Communities movement, which is across Canada. It's a coalition of many, many local environmental and social justice organizations, grassroots organizations. Some of the local ones would be the Dogwood Initiative. Lead Now, I think, is involved. I think that's more national, and many others. They're having their next nationwide rally across the country on May the 10th. flyer here, and I printed off the 5 pages that go with this, and it's on the table there. There's just one copy where people could have a look at it. And it says, on May 10th, people across Canada are stepping up to defend communities from pipelines, dirty energy projects, and runaway climate change. The last one was last November, and I know some of us were at that. And this is a way, I think, both to say no, to resist the things that are happening, and at the same time to energize ourselves, that we're not, you know, I agree with what Carmel said, that small is beautiful. That includes in terms of the group that gets together. A small group is beautiful to work with and be with, but we're part of a much larger movement, and this kind of a day brings that home. You know, it's all across the country. You go here to Vancouver, you see many groups like ours who are involved, and I think we need to be, and be ready for some ongoing long-term resistance work, in addition to the personal and communal work that's so important too. I think it's a both and. I don't think it's either or. Anyway, that's my pitch.
That's what this has sort of compelled me to write was resistance in a spirit of in common. Does that at all sort of encapsulate some of what you're drawn to with those initiatives and the future that you sort of see coming?
Yeah, in a spirit of in common, in a spirit of respect, in a spirit of care for all people, including those we are resisting, or those companies and those policies we are resisting, and those who are promulgating those. That's very important. That's very important. And, you know, Carmel, earlier you were talking about how really intensely, emotionally wrought, distraught, and angry we can be sometimes, and understandably so. But, you know, that can't become who we are.
Yeah.
I mean, feelings are feelings, but that can't become who we are, and it can't characterize our movements, you know, and our social change. So anyway, put on your calendar, May 10th. And I'm sure we'll all be hearing more about this.
Yeah. There's another gathering you can let us know about.
I will.
Some of the things that I've appreciated most about these evenings have been just the richness of the new thoughts and the exploring of the topics, but it's not in an intellectual way. It gets into engaging yourself emotionally too, and also it's been very positive and uplifting for me. Like when you talk about resistance and no, I react. It's like, I don't want to be part of no, I want to be part of yes. So that, for me, that's personally, that's where I'm at, where I've been appreciating exploring what can be, or what can be now that's different, that's more positive. So that's what I would love to see continue. I'd love to be involved in something that continues with that kind of flavor.
So I understand there's like some neighborhood groups, and that people are getting together in the neighborhoods, and I'm just wondering what might continue with that, and...
Yeah. Just, I can say a little bit about some of the things I've heard with how this moves forward, but I want to make sure that this kind of can capture, does it, or not? Deepening our understanding of the spirit of...
And new ideas, new visions, I guess, or new solutions. Or, just painting a picture of the things that work now. You know, even just painting a picture of that community, it's like, oh, I can start talking to my neighbors.
Oh my God, what a radical.
There's like little things that people can do now that make a big difference. And also, like some of the comments of, we talked about really big, scary things that are happening in the world, but we also brought it down to ourselves on how we contribute to it and how we don't have to contribute to it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean we park our cars and we never drive our cars, but it's just having more deeper understanding of it. Oh, the emotional component is part of it, is missing there. Yeah.
So, how do we get that in?
Understanding emotionally.
Yeah.
Because often you go to meetings like this and we don't talk about our feelings. And our feelings are so in here in these topics because all these things are scary. And when you just talk about, oh, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to resist this, we need to build that, it misses a whole part of the conversation. So that's what I've appreciated about these conversations.
The phrase that comes to mind is one that Dittmar would often say about how he liked to structure his university classes, and he says, a course, if it's to be a complete conversation, where there is no difference between the teacher and the student, but they're one and the same, is a course that is constantly involving the head, the hands, and the heart.
And that's what we use in
Yeah.
transition,
Yeah.
Head, hands, and heart.
So another way of getting at the question of what would we like to continue might be, what have we appreciated about, or what have we enjoyed about this experience? And that's where I spoke from.
Yeah, yeah. Before I go, Ross, can we hear from a few others? Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, coming downtown is a big deal, coming from the suburbs, so I'm thinking in terms of local stuff, what can we do to take it back for our communities?
Yeah.
Share, yeah.
Maybe I will go, because that's kind of a bit of a segue into some of the things we've been wondering about is, there's such symbiosis between things that are going on, and transition is definitely one of those. And so practically speaking, for some of the ways to get involved and to sort of continue a lot of the same approach would be by sort of working with the Transition Network and even partnering up with some of the small villages that are there. Unfortunately, I don't think there is one in the Tri-Cities. Ross and I had a conversation about where are the villages, and I was like, wow, our Tri-Cities small group is so active. Maybe they would be interested in,
Exactly.
in sort of, maybe that would be something.
That's how they get started when somebody says
Right?
yes.
So it's interesting that there might be a way for us. So that's a practical way for us to continue. And other things that have come up recently would be just a lot of, I think, affirmation from other groups. Particularly would be the interfaith societies in this area that have really expressed their appreciation for how this is absolutely open for anybody of any background or non-background. And that's also what we've heard from the onset with our friends that are particularly active in Idle No More, is a church that's opening its space to hear any story. So those are some of the things that I really appreciate about this, is that I think it is one of the few places that really names our differences, but says that throughout them and with them, there are things that we share in common, and that to have a complete story, we need to all be in the room. On the practical side, though, we've had ideas tossed around about, could we offer this series again, obviously with new themes, but could it be that they are so much more local than even this is, and where we are our own facilitators, and we are our own guest speakers, or we invite even more locally our speakers, but that we could somehow sort of just offer kind of like the basic curriculum, so that groups in, for example, Kitimat, who've contacted us, the Watershed Alliance that's been really involved in the No, that just happened on Monday, we're saying we'd really like to see a series like this happen in our community. Can you provide us with a structure that we can do that ourselves? And I love that they said we want to do that ourselves. And I hear that with what you're saying, Catherine, is we want to do that ourselves there, where we are, really literally within our own community. And then I was having conversations with friends in Camrose who were saying, yeah, like what if we did actually do this all at the same time, simultaneously, but in our own areas, and there was even a time frame tossed out of maybe we could do this from like January 2015 until sort of spring, where we're all engaging in the same themes, but we all have our own speakers and our own places, and yeah, so that's my idea that I thought I'd toss out there, and I think has a little bit to do with Ross's question of, is there a way for us to find commonality between the villages that are already here?
We're working on it in the Lutheran Synod too.
Yes, and Tim, do you
across
want to just
BC.
quickly talk about that?
Well, just that
Yeah.
we have our synod, the BC Synod Convention coming up at the end of May, and of Lutherans, and we're all across the province. So we're trying to find a way, and Didmar and Carmel are guiding us on the Faith and Society Committee to come up with a presentation and a motion that we could bring to the convention to somehow encourage and assist those who would be interested, encouraged to be interested across the synod, across the province. So, to be continued. We're working on that right now.
To be continued, and I think this is a conversation to be continued as well. One, because I've just noticed our clock, and two, because this is something that we can create together, and I'm excited to see what we all come up with. So, anyways, let's thank Ross for coming. Yeah. And yeah, we have 2 more gatherings, and it's not too late to invite new people as well if you'd like. Not that that's a plug or anything, but it's always wonderful to have new faces and new voices, and so do feel free. So yeah, 2 more gatherings, and